Thank you for joining us on Vital for Colorado Radio. I am your host, Jon Ekstrom. We are part of the Connect and Collaborate Network, and with us, as always, is our chairman and CEO, also the host of Vital for Colorado Radio, Peter Moore. Peter, thank you for joining us once again.
Morning, John. Very happy to be here again, and especially happy to introduce Gregg Moss. I think everybody in Denver has known you for more than 26 years, if I'm counting correctly.
Yes, a long time.
on the television, but also reported before that. And but now you're on the Chamber of Commerce, which is a world of which I'm familiar because we have so many Chamber of Commerce reps on the Vital for Colorado board, and I was on a Chamber of Commerce board for 7 years. And
excellent.
I like chambers.
Good. We like them too.
I like chambers.
And we like our partnerships with you too.
So Gregg is the president and CEO of the Metro North Chamber of Commerce, and just so people have a sense of the geographic scope, I know that there are at least a dozen cities and probably county representation, and many major employers are in that area, but could you maybe outline your constituency?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. It's
Absolutely,
good to see you
Gregg.
guys, and we appreciate our partnership with Vital for Colorado. But the Chamber, Metro North Chamber, covers 12 municipalities, 4 counties, and 6 school districts. The municipalities, we'll start with the cities. If you go out on far east, we go from Brighton, Commerce City, kind of the I-70 corridor there. We have Federal Heights, Thornton, and North Glen. Up to the Carbon Valley area, which would be Dacono, Firestone, Frederick, Erie. We have Broomfield, we have Westminster, and then we have Arvada as well. So
wow,
that's
that is a lot of space. That's a lot of real estate that you cover.
a lot of real estate. It is. It is indeed, and it's one of the fastest growing regions in Colorado, if not the fastest right now, when you encompass all of that geographic area.
Well, there's still a very strong mix of rural and urban.
Indeed, yeah.
Even though the urban is growing so very much. I go to Dacono. A friend of mine has a shop up there. I'm a car guy, and there's a little racetrack up there.
Yes, I know that racetrack very well. Love
and it sure seems rural out there, but when you get down to Thornton, it's not.
Well, and the blurred lines between urban and rural are really getting less clear right now. I mean, it's certainly hard to tell because of affordable housing and where people are having to live, and many people are now driving as far as they need to.
Right.
If they can afford a home. That's really what it's all about. But, we serve all of Adams County, and of course Adams County is massive in scope.
Enormous.
And agriculture is a big part of that county, and we work with a lot of ranchers and the agribusiness and the future of agriculture. That's a big focus.
That's interesting to me because as a Chamber of Commerce, you compare that against, say, if you were to go further east where everything is sort of agriculture and farming.
Right.
You are dealing with sort of suburban issues, you have energy development, you have manufacturing, and you have agriculture, which has got to make for a very interesting and dynamic organization in terms of the needs of your various members. Is that fair? Yeah,
it makes for a good conversation and a lot of priorities wanting to be pulled in certain areas. But at the end of the day, we agree that there are probably 5 or 6 common issues that everyone is facing. But what's really exciting is to you take a look at the Eastern Plains and where the development is happening there, and the priority of Adams County to partner with the National Western Complex and that $1 billion project, and how we can really elevate and become known as the agricultural center of the future. Yeah. That's exciting. And then you get just a little bit further south and a little bit further west, Anschutz Medical Campus, part of that is actually in Adams County. Not a lot of people know that. But the biotech sector and the things that are being developed there, and when you mash all that together, this is a really vital place. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and no pun intended, of course.
No. It's another plug for Vital Colorado.
Well, thank you. I've watched the Anschutz campus grow over the years, and have had the opportunity through Chambers of Commerce to go up there, and it's become truly a world-class biotech center.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And what's going on there is just amazing. It's just almost every year. It's just not the building. It's just it's the scientists coming in. It's the contracts are being landed. The basic primary research is being done.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And it's also a hospital, and so people go there and hopefully get well too.
Absolutely.
So it's a combination of many things.
And the incubator that's there, as you know, is creating companies and opportunities that are saving lives. I mean, some of the things that you hear about, and I'm not smart enough to go into the details, but it is inspiring, and it's happening in our backyard. So that's really inspiring.
Well, there are probably many areas in Colorado that you would say, but I can't think of any that are stronger in terms of all the different influences that you have to deal with. And it's almost a microcosm of statewide political efforts. There are many of them over the years. And one needs to be more than a diplomat and have be a sage and wise person to sort of balance all these competing economic concerns.
Yeah, indeed.
And also infrastructure concerns.
Infrastructure is really at the top of mind of most people right now. It certainly will get a lot of headlines as we're moving into the election season, which if you turn on the TV, we're there. And it'll get more ramped up, but transportation, affordable housing, workforce attraction and retention, those are the three main things that we're really leaning into right now.
And recently, and I'm thinking about the last election for some of the northern communities, there were very, very strong anti-growth type initiatives. And I think, from a personal point of view, I think that's the wrong way to approach it, because it's almost like the Club of Rome back in the 1960s and 70s.
Yeah.
And what kind of anti-growth initiatives are touching your communities?
Well, one that we were watching very closely is Initiative 66, which the ballot measure that was making its way potentially onto the ballot. It was getting into the signature phase here, and that is I guess I would characterize it as a no-growth, slow growth, and I won't go into the specifics, but it's, mandating that communities cannot grow above 1 or 2% of whatever their housing expansion was.
Exactly, and similar to what City of Golden has, for instance. Or
it's
what
based
City
on
of,
that, yes.
Yeah, City of Lakewood was either considering or enacted. I can't remember where that stands right now, but similar to that concept, but on a statewide level, right?
Right. What we're hearing this morning, however, is that the backer of that ballot measure, this is coming from our friends at the Denver Business Journal, has decided not to pursue gathering signatures. I think the email that he sent to the DBJ overnight was that it was going to be too expensive, and perhaps just too short of a runway to gather those signatures. And I think the time frame is what he's really leaning into, is that it's not enough time, because there were some questions early on about the language of the ballot measure. But regardless, it appears that it won't be on the November ballot.
Well, that's really breaking news, and I'm sure that initiative will come back in a different form in years to come. But for this year, I think the people, especially this coming fall, have so much on their plate to look at and to consider, and very important issues, getting back transportation, for example. It would be difficult to have that in the mix also. Slow growth, no growth, infrastructure for burgeoning growth. How do you balance that?
How do you balance that? And they're almost tied together. So I put myself in a constituent's shoes and go, all right, I'm driving from Boulder down here, or for me this morning from Broomfield down here. What should be a 30-minute drive, even in heavy traffic, was more like 50 minutes.
Oh, great.
And that's because of two crashes, one on I-25, one on I-70. You can't ever, you just have to know your way around that. But in my travels down here, I saw 7 out-of-state license plates. Mm-hmm. And so I could, if I wanted to, make the correlation between, my gosh, because of all this growth, this transportation problem is getting worse, and let's just shut down the growth, and then the transportation will be, somewhat better. And as you know, that doesn't correlate always, ever, and so you have to look at it from a balanced perspective. But I understand where the constituents are. So if they had both been on the ballot, what would people choose? And the languaging is somewhat appealing to, yes, we want fewer people coming in. That will help us all, save us some money. It's really a hard message to get out there and educate people on what really is growth and smart growth.
Greg, I want to key into something that you said as we're talking about Initiative 66 no longer going forward. The way that you ramped into that was what we're learning from our friends at the Denver Business Journal.
Yeah, my friends, yes.
Which, to me, is a very sort of newscaster way of doing it.
Okay, yes.
Because I feel like I've heard you use that phrase, because I watched you on the 9 News Morning Show for any number of years, and I feel like that exact cadence and that exact phrasing is one that just was familiar. It was like I was at home with my kids, feeding them cereal, that kind of thing. So I think we would be doing a bit of a disservice if we didn't touch on your journalism career just a bit, because I think that's where most people are going to recognize you from. Mm-hmm. Does that happen fairly frequently. How often are you getting recognized?
Well, fairly often. I wouldn't say I'm Kim Kardashian by any stretch of the means, but
is that weird when it happens, though?
Yeah, it's a little. It's actually very nice.
Sure.
Because people will recognize the work that you've done. I hope that's what they recognize. Then they may not like you at all, and that might be a little uncomfortable and awkward. That's happened, but no. What it says is that we did a good job. We, and I say that collectively as a team, and for full transparency, I started my journalism career here in this town at the Denver Business Journal.
Yeah.
So I'm still very in awe of what they do and the work that they do and the quality of journalism.
Product.
Yeah, they do, and I'm so glad they're still around and going strong. But yeah, it's good to be recognized for that because we worked hard at it.
Absolutely. And how did you make that transition from print to TV? And were you seeking television journalism at all?
No. Here's what happened. And it was 1992, if I remember correctly. Ray Shaw was the publisher of the Denver. Well, he owned American City Business Journals, and the publisher, Maureen Reagan Smith. We had gotten a clear directive that other markets had built relationships with their local TV station. And if you remember back in '92, there was a bitter battle going on between the Rocky and the Post. I think it was a penny a year, and you've got the Denver Business Journal where I think we were $49.99 a year. I mean, how can you compete against business newsrooms? They had 35 reporters in each of these newsrooms, and here were little guys struggling. So from a marketing perspective, it was pretty smart. Get your product out there, get some branding recognition, etc. So I tried. We just struck out with every station. Even 9 at first. They said, we're not really interested. And we got a phone call one evening, like 5:30, and it came to me, of course, because I had been working on this deal. And they said, well, Channel 9, we'll give you a shot tomorrow morning, talk about interest rates or something. We'll see you at 5:30.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, and I wasn't going to do it, but I went to search for some comrades in the newsroom, and no one was there, and those that were did not want to do it, and because there was not an appeal to be on TV. So I figured, well, I'll just go do it and see what happens, and hopefully not embarrass us, and then we can get a reporter to be on there. And I frankly, I will never forget. It was Halloween, October 31st, 1993. I was absolutely awful. I was horrified. Didn't know what the heck I was doing on TV, and got off and thought, well, that's probably the end of my career in journalism, print journalism as well. But they said, no, let's try this. And I said, great, and it won't be me. We'll get somebody else. And they said, nope, it's going to be you. So that's how it unfolded. And the rest, they say, is history.
It's funny what you thought was a career-ending performance ended up being a career-starting performance.
Isn't that funny how that unfolds sometimes? Just the most unexpected thing. And, for the first 3 years before I got transferred to Dallas for American City, I was working both jobs. So I would start my day at 9, and actually they would identify me as a reporter for the Denver Business Journal.
Yeah,
if you remember, I used to have this huge pen that was DBJ.
I actually do remember that.
It was, and they would make fun of it. It wasn't until I came back from Dallas that I was full-time at 9.
I gotcha. I'm curious, what skills, and before we get there, actually, while you were doing the Denver Business Journal, it looks like you had some other ventures. Or, I'm sorry, while you were doing 9 News.
Yes.
You were doing some other ventures as well. And I think in terms of giving you perspective as a business reporter, that had to be useful because you're out actually practicing business.
Yep.
Was that challenging, working multiple gigs like that?
Yes, but also very rewarding. So being an entrepreneur, which I was during my time frame, and all of this was, I would make sure we cleared that through management so there wasn't no conflict. Being an entrepreneur and growing that business and eventually selling it gave me great insight into the challenges and the respect I have for small business owners and going out there and giving it their all. Working in the IOC and working on some consulting stuff for the International Olympic Committee gave me great global perspective and great connections and finding out the importance of sport connected to tourism, connected to economic development. I have the utmost amazement at how that works. So, I love being able to do that. It was challenging from a time perspective. Yeah, for sure. Just how much time do you have in your life?
Absolutely. what skills from sort of working in journalism translate to the business world? Because I think a lot of times, people see journalists and they go, well, sometimes they don't understand how the real world works. You were working gigs during that. But what skills from journalism sort of translate to your role in business?
I think a couple things come to mind right away. One is the innate curiosity and being able to ask questions and just wanting to know and get to the bottom of the real deal. And that's served me very well in this new role, is to really find out and find out the information and ask the right questions, but also from a fair and balanced standpoint. So at some point we're probably going to talk about energy and the impact it has. Certainly we pay close attention in northern Colorado to this, but to understand both sides and have the perspective of both sides, that's very been very beneficial. And just the tenacity that comes along with it is also important. Journalists are pretty tenacious in making sure they get to the bottom of something. And then finally, just the ability to tell a story and to understand what's a really good story. And we've got a great story to tell right now in business.
Yeah, 100%.
And all those factors, in my mind, sort of get down to trust. That you're fundamentally trying to become a trustworthy or a truth sayer, somebody that believes, got down to the bottom of the real deal, can express it, and you can rely upon it.
Right.
And that's rare in our society. It's almost as if everything is becoming more and more fractured, and people are not trusting institutions, not trusting people, and they're cynical. So I think the idea of having somebody with such a long tenure that built such a high degree of trust is the perfect ambassador to talk about what really are very difficult business issues that need to be fixed. These are not debates. These are real needs.
Right.
To quote the West Wing, we're playing with live ammo here.
Yeah. So
Essentially, you were giving me the Monty Python quotes. Get ready for the West Wing. But what ultimately led you to the Metro North Chamber of Commerce?
I made the decision to transition out of journalism. Actually, this is kind of weird. More than 5 years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's an odd business because you work on cycles in television news. You have contracts, and so when I re-upped my contract, they're typically 1 to 3 years. This was a 3-year deal, and I was very clear when I signed. I said, at the end of this 3 years, that's it. And can you imagine giving your 3-year notice to somebody? And it's kind of an odd situation.
Yeah, no kidding.
But I've always wanted to be transparent and upfront, and they've been really good to me, and I've really honor and respect 9 News. They're just the best management I've worked with. But in that point, I said, we're going to phase out here. So I'd like to be able to transition from full-time to part-time in year 2 and 3, and that's what I did. And so I worked for a very large nonprofit that's based in Lakewood. That is actually affiliated with a church of all things, which is kind of interesting. But more importantly, it's got lots of little nonprofits underneath, and that's what I was in charge of. But moving into the business world again, again, it's a nonprofit, but it's also very connected to the impacting of my community, where we have lived for 2 decades plus. Yeah. And we believe strongly in building a better community, just as a family. I know all the players in the Metro North region. I've worked with them for many years, both on primarily as a reporter, but built great rapport. Some of them, would get angry with me from time to time, but we were always able to come back to the table. But that's what attracted to me, and all the opportunity to be able to support connectivity, conversations, and growth in a smart way up there. If I could play a little part of that, that would be really cool.
Wow. I think that's a great transition story.
And just sort of a final point, I don't know how many MC gigs you had, but I saw you over and over again in very different contexts. You're one of the 2 or 3 more active MCs, I think, for a decade.
Yeah, and speaking engagements as well. I think Kim Christensen and Ed Green take the top, just so you know.
Certainly.
The FCC would mandate that we keep a log of how many we did, because it goes into the public file and part of the licensing. And I, one year I think I did 58 speaking engagements.
That's a lot.
And that was a lot.
That's more than 1 a week. I mean,
and it goes through seasons, as you know.
Oh, certainly.
A lot of them, half of them were, emceeing opportunities, and the other half were speaking opportunities. Yeah. I really enjoyed the speaking opportunities, to be able to kind of impart information to people. But the gala every now and then was okay, too.
Oh, yeah. No, and you think about most people. I taught public speaking for 2 years, and the old Jerry Seinfeld joke is people's number one fear is public speaking. Number 2 is death.
Yeah,
He said, so statistically speaking, people would rather
die.
No, people would rather be in the casket at a funeral than giving the eulogy.
Yeah.
Which to me is a great joke. So if it's like anything else, though, it's muscles that you exercise, and the more that you can exercise them, the less scary it becomes. But I'm struck by that.
Well,
volume.
I'll share a little secret with you, and it's probably not going to be a secret now. I really am an introvert. It takes a lot of energy for me to,
to be up, right?
Yeah, and right before every event that I would either speak at or MC, on the way there I'd go, why did I agree to do this? Why did I agree to do this? And just get that nervous pit in your stomach. But I always ended up enjoying it because of great people.
So that's actually probably a more typical pattern. I did debate in high school, in law school. There's a type of debate called moot court. Ended up being a trial lawyer for 25 years of my career, my first part of my career. And I view myself as an introvert. And eventually, I don't know if it's exercising muscles, but you do it enough, you recognize the structure, and it's just, it just fades away.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
I talked to a lot of people.
just fades
who feel
away.
that same way.
Well, gentlemen, we have a bingo here because I also consider myself an introvert.
Well, there we go.
Yeah,
And
okay.
people will ask me, public relations, kind of an odd career choice for an introvert, right? And I say, you know what? If you can reach people who are introverted and you know how to connect because you have deep empathy for people who maybe are at a distance at first, maybe a little bit unsure. So if you come from that place, you build empathy and you can build bridges in a very meaningful
Well,
way.
there are limits to this, all of this, because the shoemaker's children have no shoes.
Yes.
So you can't go too far.
Yes, and it's all part of our therapy. That's
Right.
what I look at, the way I look at it.
So we only have a little bit of time left here in our first segment, but you mentioned that the North Metro area is the fastest growing region of Colorado. Can you talk through what some of the opportunities are with that and maybe some of the challenges?
Well, certainly the opportunities are you increase diversity in industries that are coming to your town, jobs, the kind of employee that you're attracting, which could shift and change the culture of a community. We are seeing that now in a very positive way and set it up for great success in the future. And of course, tax base. When you're when you're sitting in a city manager's shoes or a mayor's shoes, it doesn't hurt to have that additional tax revenue coming in. So that up levels the entire community too. The challenges are obvious. How you manage growth and be smart about it so it does not impact your community negatively. And not everyone in your community is going to like growth. And I get that. We're not only talking increase in traffic, but we're talking water issues. We're talking school issues, education kinds of things.
Power infrastructure.
All the infrastructure that comes along with that, too, is very challenging.
So what role does the chamber play in sort of working with the community and the various communities where you are in facilitating some of that? If you could touch on that briefly.
Yeah, I think the main role of a chamber or any kind of business organization like ours is to really convene the conversation. And convene the conversation in a constructive way as much as you can, taking the emotion out of it and sitting around the table, because there are really smart people out there that sometimes those conversations get derailed by a lot of emotion.
Certainly.
And that never helps move it into a positive direction. So that's really what our main goal is, to convene some positive conversations and help bring to the forefront opportunities that maybe some folks have not seen that have been used in other communities around.
And perhaps just to set up, we just have a few seconds now, but in terms of the major challenges that you think need to be solved, let's say this year, could you list 2 or 3 of them?
All infrastructure related, I would say transportation, affordable housing, education I would throw in there as well. All of that is under the umbrella of workforce attraction and retention. And something that we're not talking a lot about now, but as you look out to the dryness that we see and the heat that we're experiencing, water issues will start to creep back into the conversation.
We'll jump into those issues our next segment.
Yep, we'll be talking a lot more with Gregg Moss, President and CEO of the Metro North Chamber of Commerce. Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado, is our host. If you like this show, check out vitalforcolorado.com. Under the Learn tab is videos and podcasts. You can find this episode as well as every episode we've done. We've got more coming up in our next segment. Thanks for staying with us. Thank you for staying with us on Vital for Colorado Radio. I am your on-air producer, Jon Ekstrom, sitting here with Gregg Moss, the president and CEO of the Metro North Chamber of Commerce. More with Gregg here in a minute, but Peter Moore is our host. He is the chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado. Peter, tell us a little bit about Vital, please.
Sure, Greg. First of all, thanks for joining us. We
It's an
actually
honor.
have one of
Thank
our
you.
coalition members right here.
Yeah, indeed.
Vital for Colorado is a business organization. It's been operating for about 5 years. It's a Colorado nonprofit corporation. We're run by a 15-person board of directors, almost all Chamber of Commerce people, but also some business heads. Everybody's a president. And we don't have any direct representation by industry because we're trying to be the voice of business for Colorado. I think when we started in the fall of 2013, 2014, we thought we'd do very well. We had a couple thousand people that might follow us, but now it's 5 years later, and two or three, we have over 1,000 businesses that have signed our pledge. We have over a couple hundred politicians on both sides of the bench that have signed a different version of the pledge. I learned you can't really walk up to a politician and say, "Would you sign my pledge, please?" But you can get something.
Unless you're Grover Norquist or something.
Yes, not.
Right.
But of greatest significance, we now have about 86,000 Colorado citizens that have either physically gone to a fair or gone online and signed it. So I think we have a very, very large coalition. Our mission is really to talk about rational energy policy. And rational energy policy changes over the years. And we're just looking for a rational result that leads to predictability, that allows the opportunity for the almost 250,000 people that have primary and secondary employment that depend upon the oil and gas industry. We also support all of the above energy policy, and many of those industries are symbiotic with the energy industry. And we try to I guess we try to educate people on the regulatory system and how flexible it is, and when there are problems, it adapts and changes, and industry itself, when there are problems, it adapts and changes. So that's what we're about, and hopefully those words, I know that your chamber joined before you joined the chamber,
Yes.
but as new head of the chamber, hopefully that still sounds like a worthy
Absolutely.
mission.
Yeah, it really is a important and, no pun intended, vital mission to what is so important to our state. Not just to our state, but to our country and to the livelihood of many people, but to our lives. And so it's about that responsible conversation. So what I love about Vital is it is about being responsible with energy policy, leaning into those conversations, having the courageous conversations, but understanding that this is really an important industry.
Well, and we're part of the Connect and Collaborate network here, and those two words are extremely important to Vital's mission, to connecting with business interests, and ensuring that energy is produced in a responsible way, to where you limit sort of uncertainty and consternation. One of the principles of the pledge that Peter mentioned was we believe in science, not hyperbole. And so espousing that is one of the key missions here. And we'll do that here in just a moment. If you want to learn more about Vital for Colorado or sign the pledge, go to vitalforcolorado.com. That's VITALFOR Colorado.com. So, Gregg, one thing I'm curious about, we touched on some of the issues that the Metro North Chamber of Commerce is interested in. We'll dig into those a little bit more here. But you recently attended a field tour hosted by Liberty Oil Field Services.
Yeah, Chris Wright, who's the CEO of Liberty,
Who has been on this show.
Listen, he's brilliant. What is he
He's
got?
something else,
He's a
isn't he?
PhD. He's got multiple majors and other kind of cred that brings him up. But he's really smart and what I think is a very balanced approach in energy production.
Yes, absolutely. And so, can you tell us a little bit about how this opportunity arose and give us an overview of what you saw on a field tour that Liberty Oil Field Services hosted?
Sure. Liberty invited a few of us who they wanted to connect with, and certainly because I'm a new face in the Metro North area, they reached out, which I'm glad to do. And we took a field tour up at one of their drill sites. Actually, it's an extraction drill site, but they're doing work with extraction right outside of Erie. It's right at the, it's right on the Erie dump. if you're familiar with the dump. And having been a former resident of Erie, we lived there for well over 12 years, very familiar with the territory. What was surprising to me is how close this drilling site was to just in spitting distance of a new housing development with probably, I would say, $400,000, $500,000 value homes.
Wow.
But the technology, I've been on fracking sites in the past. It's probably been about 5 to 7 years.
Right.
And in the past, when I've toured these sites, it's been so noisy, even with earplugs.
Yeah.
You couldn't hear anything. There was no way you could have a conversation. And here I am, especially Liberty's taken this in far advanced. The fracking sound and noise and other kinds of things have just evolved amazingly. And I could have a conversation with Chris just as close as I am to you right now, and no earplugs, and it was very eye-opening.
Chris talked about the quiet rigs he's been developing
Quiet fleet.
on the quiet fleet. And I think when he was here maybe a month ago, he gave a story. I don't recall which community it was, but he finished a fracking fracking job. Went and talked to one of the neighbors who was sitting out back watching him.
Yes, he does.
And the neighbor said, "When do you plan
when
to
are you going to start?" Right. Yeah.
And he says, "We're finished."
Yeah, we're
He
done.
said, I didn't hear a thing, and that's what you're describing.
Yes.
And then really overall, that's sort of emblematic, in my view, of the radical innovation that's occurred, especially since 2014. There was an economic downturn, and people really needed to try to figure out how to change things, how to adapt, how to have a social license to operate, and put a lot of focus on that. And I think it's yielding a lot. And so it's not a matter where it's not your father's Oldsmobile anymore, but it's a different set of operations in 2014 that was in 2010. And when people like to argue against it, I would prefer, if I could, and maybe Chambers of Commerce can help, to get people a little bit updated and just focus on, well, how about the new developments? How about the way we're doing it now?
Yes.
And not talk about the way that was, because there has been change and innovation.
We're not Jed Clampett here.
Yeah.
No, we're not. But that's a very good point. It is about education, and it is about convening a conversation, as we talked about in our first segment, that if we can agree to take the emotion out of it. Because I will tell you, I get it. You know, does anyone want a drill site, right outside their backyard? Probably not.
Right.
But the reality is the technology has come so far, and it's so advanced, it's not going to be there invisible for a long period of time. The safety and the technology advancements that are in place right now, and the regulatory environment that we have here in Colorado compared to other parts of the country is amazing. And again, you really do have, I use Chris as an example. You've got people working in these organizations that aren't, the big black caped, people just, trying to get the money out of this.
Yeah, twirling their mustache.
No, there is a lot of care about, I care about this community, I care about the environment, I want to make sure it's safe, it's quiet, it has the least impact possible, as Chris will point out, and let's all be honest. Is there impact? You bet there is. But let's balance it. And so we're convening a conversation with Chris and some others in the industry, both and on the renewable side too, coming up in late August, early September, in our communities to bring those conversations together.
Well, certainly, and a lot of hot spots where that you represent. Certainly Broomfield, Erie, Firestone. You mentioned these communities, Thornton. These conversations are happening, and one of the things that you touched on that was a key learning for you as a journalist was the ability to tell your story. And in the absence of telling your own story, someone will tell it for you. And the industry, having been run now by engineers and geologists who have a mind for things that are so far beyond my comprehension, but typically they've made up their mind themselves. They go, oh, I've done all the science, I've done all the analysis, this makes sense to me. Why doesn't it make sense to you?
Right.
And so that's no way to run a railroad here. So getting out and telling your story and filling in the side of the picture where your story has been told for you for so long is so vital. So to provide a forum and a platform for that, I think, is really terrific.
It's well, and it can't just be a one-off. I mean, organizations like Vital, the industry itself, COGA, Colorado Oil and Gas Association, all of them need to have that consistent message out there. And we can't just shove people who have questions and maybe start out with a little emotion too
Right.
to the side. We have to really embrace that and be open to hearing that, and being really frank and honest and transparent in this communication piece of it.
Certainly.
So for your event in the fall, if we can help, happy to help.
Yes, you will.
So
We're
feel
just
free to give me a call.
I will do that, because Chris was kind of the linchpin, because if you
Right.
listen, on the way up there, I'll just share this quick story. It's about a 25 minute drive from here in Denver, and what was amazing, he stood up in the bus and he gave a historical perspective of how oil was formed, back in the dinosaur ages. And I was so enthralled. I'm like, I learned something. You should be teaching college.
Did he talk about the interior Cretaceous Seaway?
He
and all
did,
that?
and I was like, the interior Cretaceous, whatever it is, Seaway, I never knew that existed.
So Chris can go back farther and can explain how all energy comes directly from the sun.
Exactly.
And I've certainly got, and as Reagan used to say, Michael Reagan, the comic, that's the big yellow thing.
Yeah, that's the thing. Exactly. I sort of felt very, I was just slouching down in my seat because he was asking questions. I'm like, oh, please don't call
Don't call on me.
Don't call me, because I have no idea what the answer is, but I'm learning something.
Well, getting back to the controversy, to me, one of the things I always said, because I worked for one of the energy companies, was, and I would train employees on how to engage with their neighbors, their friends. You need to be an ambassador for your industry, and a lot of people weren't equipped to do that. And I said, people are entitled to be wrong. People have read what they've read. They've heard what they've heard. It's not your job to judge that.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they're wrong doesn't mean that they're crazy.
Right.
So you can help them fill in the other side of the picture. They will make up their mind on their own, but this demonizing, this retrenching, this sort of tribal warfare is really brutal, and certainly the energy debate is emblematic of that. But one thing I'm curious about is, in terms of where you represent in the Metro North Chamber of Commerce, having access to cheap oil and natural gas here in Colorado certainly plays into the affordability of manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that plays into the work that you do every day at the chamber?
It does. It makes the conversation sometimes, a little more challenging, because you have, let's be honest, you have municipalities with city councils or town councils. You have county commissioners and boards and public comment, and sometimes these meetings will go to 2 or 3 in the morning, and
Right.
there's a lot of yelling and screaming sometimes, and a lot of emotion. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to sit back rationally and go, my life could not work without this kind of fossil fuel development.
Right.
It could not. I just think about everything I touched on my way here today, and when I woke up this morning, everything is petroleum related.
Everything in this room.
Everything we're sitting on, talking on, writing with
Pen,
now.
the table, the carpets, the
Yeah.
chairs.
So and then we have to look at it as a chamber. Yes, what industries does it impact? It certainly impacts manufacturing, but it also impacts agriculture, price of fuel, cost of that. It impacts the attraction of other industries to our neighborhoods. It affects affordable housing, because if you have certain areas that you're not able to build in and that sort of thing, all of that.
So I would argue, if you took the emotion out of it, that all of these arguments are actually aligned. And all of the things that the politicians really want, and I'm thinking about long-term low-cost energy leading to the repatriate of good, strong industry in the U.S.,
Right.
leading to affordable housing, increasing job bases,
Yep.
taxes, having taxes available to the infrastructure work that you need to have a successful life. There's alignment. It's not the scarecrow saying, well, that's another good way to go too, sort of pointing both directions.
Right. But it's hard to see that, the forest from the trees sometimes. And especially when, you wake up one day and you look in the backyard and you see, what is this big fence tent going around and a rig, and then I start Googling and I start looking on the internet, and then I get a little fearful, and I'm maybe not getting the entire picture.
Because you can become an expert, a so-called expert, in a matter of seconds. Mm-hmm. And if you just Google fracking, you're going to find some scary stuff. And all of it, not all of it is going to be necessarily truthful or up to date. So convening this in a way that you have, I think is fascinating.
Let's talk about transportation. I think that's one of your other major issues, and so why don't you introduce the issue? What are the issues, and what needs to be done this year, and who's trying to help?
First of all, traffic sucks. Let's just be honest. It's just really.
And if you've driven that stretch between of I-25 between, say, Denver and Erie, you'll know that it sucks.
Well, even in the south part of town, and then heading west on I-70, but then you factor in all these the impact of state highways in municipalities, which there are a number of them, and then municipalities having their own infrastructure problems. It is one of the primary concerns that we have. So we have been joined forces with the Denver Chamber as part of a massive coalition of industry and business organizations. There is the ballot measure that will be moving forward. The language is set and been approved. The amount that will be sought, assuming that all the proper signatures are verified and we get enough of them, will be for a half a penny increase in sales tax. That will be divided up amongst CDOT. CDOT gets a small portion, but municipalities get a larger portion. Counties get a portion as well, and they will have a lot of local control about where they decide to spend those dollars. And so the dollars may be spent on, pavement, repaving, cement, whatever it might be, and increasing lanes, but it probably will have a lot of intermodal and multimodal transportation options, mass transit.
And what kind of impact will that half a penny have over the years? Is that enough? Is that close to being enough?
Oh gosh, no. It's not enough. It really isn't. I mean, when you look at just to keep up with what is on the CDOT list now, to the main priorities, and that's certainly not everything they want, but it's somewhere it's around $9 billion. That's the figure that'll be thrown out there. I've heard figures that are much higher than that if you really wanted to address everything. That's all the bridges, all the challenges with major thoroughfares. So this, we're looking at bonding, maybe $3.2 billion. Or, I don't know the exact figure, so don't quote me on that. But it's not. It's a start. It's not the finish by any means. It's just a start.
But it's a good start.
It is something.
Yeah.
it is something. The legislature has tackled this for many years, or I should say, tried to tackle it for many years, and it's not been able to, as a group, as a whole. And I'm not blaming either side here, that nothing's come out, and it's been impossible to pass something. And so this is the closest we've got to making a good start than we've had in many years.
For many, over the last dozen years or so, you would hate to see your government evolve and not have the people that are elected for office and have the people through these massive statewide initiatives somewhat try to govern the state.
Interesting.
And so intuitively, you would think you would just want to fix government first and have the legislatures do the job, and I sense that you believe that.
Yes.
But here we are for something that is an absolute crisis, where we're going the initiative route.
Yeah, it's interesting. And
I don't know if that's I don't know if it's irony, but just want to get your thoughts on that.
It is ironic, isn't it? And we'll spend about $9 million in communicating what we think is the benefit of passing this measure. So there's lots of what I would say are wasted resources in going this route. It's what we have. There is some talk amongst the gubernatorial candidates, especially on the Democratic side. They're talking about, well, should we repeal parts of Tabor? Well, good luck with that. We'll see what happens. And you can blame Tabor, you can blame Gallagher Amendment, you can blame a lot of different things.
23.
Yeah, exactly. But here we are, and it is fascinating. Where I stand personally, this is not representation of who I work for, but where I stand personally is, you scratch your head and go, but I thought that's why we have elected officials and have a democracy here. So why is it coming back to us all the time?
But because we're just not getting the result, and crises are coming forward, and there's no... I guess I wouldn't say there's no greater crisis. Also, you mentioned, we just have a couple minutes, we also mentioned affordable housing. Mm-hmm. And I see that as being tied to this also, because can't get there.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the right people can't get there. And I also see that tied on with energy, because you can't have affordable housing unless you have a tax base for the government.
Yeah.
So to me,
it's very cyclical and circular.
We've almost got an Ouroboros here.
But you can work on all three, and you need to start with one, and to me, transportation is the right one.
Well, it is certainly huge, and I would throw in that we're probably going to have some education considerations as well on this ballot, and that's an important one. I don't want to ignore that by any means. But transportation, what we're hearing about transportation, more and more large companies are saying, and I've heard this directly from some CEOs, that it's we're probably not going to move because of the transportation or relocate challenges that we're seeing. But when it comes to expanding, there's two things that are really impacting us right now, and it's really the workforce attraction. We can't attract somebody, and one of the main reasons we can't attract them is because of transportation.
Right.
And affordable housing.
This may be outside, I'm not sure of all the committees you're on in this coalition, but there's kind of a side angle in terms of autonomous cars as providing some degree, and I know the state is formed not really a blue ribbon panel, but a very strong panel of people working on that. And if successful, that could really accelerate many of the solutions.
Absolutely. It will, and it will take a long time. There is so much infrastructure that has to be put into place. And CDOT's got a whole division now that's all they do is look at transportation in the future. And it's Amy Ford is heading that up right now, and it's doing great stuff. Panasonic out by DIA is working a lot with CDOT on some pilot projects for autonomous vehicles, and that final mile between, where a rail will drop you off or a bus and then take you to your place of employment. So we're making great headway, but to be fully autonomous, it's a long way away.
Yeah, that's a long road. I read an article recently about how Google Maps and Waze and apps like that are actually putting different infrastructure challenges on cities because people are starting to travel roads more to avoid the traffic that aren't necessarily scheduled to be updated and maintained in the way that some of the main thoroughfares are. Have you heard anything like that?
I have not, but it makes total sense.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you think I got here? There are two crashes, and the one on I-70. I punched in Waze, and I'm like, okay, oh yeah, I can go around York. I can come around the backside here and make it in 7 minutes.
Apps are always talking about disrupting, and I think this is disrupting urban planning in a way that was not anticipated. So, you introduce a solution. Once you have a new solution, then you almost create a new set of problems as a result of that.
You can sometimes.
I read similar articles. I think the example that was given was Los Angeles, and a lot of the people in Los Angeles are like, who are these people? Why are they going through our neighborhoods?
Yeah.
And they found out that the software is redirecting people there.
Yeah.
Then the software also has a little cartoon-like icon for where the police are, and the police don't like that.
Well, there you go.
As people avoid traffic jams, and turns out they avoid the police.
Yes.
Certainly, yeah, or perhaps DUI checkpoints, which has a different level of harm to it. Greg, in our last couple of minutes, what is coming up next for the Chamber? What are you all working on? What are things we should keep our eye on? Feel free to talk about the future of the Chamber.
Just really quickly, we are leaning into, we just did a survey, what we call the voice of the ecosystem. We interviewed over 250 businesses in our region to find out what does the Chamber of the future need to look like to support you. These are small, medium, and large companies. So we're establishing 3 different centers that we're leaning into now, and we'll unfold lots of new programs in 2019. A center for business advocacy, so how can we partner up with great groups like Vital, Colorado Business Roundtable, other organizations, and be a more aligned and I would say louder voice for the business community. And we are establishing a center for leadership because across the board we're hearing from our primary employers that leadership is a really big challenge for them. And then finally establishing a center for innovation and entrepreneurship.
And where does one go on the internet to find out more about the Chamber?
MetroNorthChamber.com.
All right, fantastic. Peter Moore, please give the plug for Vital for Colorado.
Well, Vital for Colorado also can be found on the internet, and it's spelled out VITALFOR Colorado.com.
Fantastic. Well, Greg, this was an enormous pleasure. President and CEO of the Metro North Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you.
Peter Moore, Chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado. You can find this episode on our website. Go to the Learn tab, go to Videos and Podcast, and you can hear more from Gregg. Please visit them on the web, and until we hear you next time, thanks for listening.